Hi, I'm retired NYPD Detective Vic Ferrari, and welcome to NYPD Through the Looking Glass podcast, where you get unique insight into the New York City Police Department. Before we get started, I encourage you to check out my Amazon author page, where you'll find my series of behind-the-scenes NYPD books. They're $10 paperback or $2.99 ebook download, including my latest NYPD Behind the Blue Wall of Silence. Today's guest is a retired 29-year veteran of the Naperville Police Department and the spokesperson for the National Police Organization. Sergeant Betsy Brantner Smith, welcome to the show.
Hey, thanks so much for having me. I'm really looking forward to this conversation.
Thank you, Betsy. Please introduce yourself. Tell our listeners a little something about yourself.
So I'm an Illinois farm girl, born and raised. I live in Southern Arizona now. But I started as a police dispatcher at age 17 when I was a senior in high school. That was in 1976. That's how old I am. And I dispatched all through college, became a police officer at age 21 in a Chicago suburb, Naperville, Illinois. And I did that for 29 years, worked my way up through the ranks, retired after 29 years as a sergeant. And I had kind of a parallel career while I was a cop as a police trainer and a writer. And so many years after retirement, when I was writing for various organizations, including the National Police Association, they asked me, this was July of 2020, if I wanted to do some media hits for them. And so now I'm their spokesman.
Tell us about the National Police.
So the National Police Association, it's nationalpolice.org. It sounds like a union. It's not a union. It's a C3. It's a charity. And what we do is we get involved in various things around the nation to benefit not just the American law enforcement officer, but also the people who support us. So we have a policy mission. We have a legal mission where we have attorneys who file amicus briefs before the Supreme Court. Anything that will negatively impact police officers' abilities to enforce the law. We also support law enforcement in ways like if your police department is too small or don't have the funds to start an explorer post or to buy your canine a piece of body armor, we'll get involved in things like that. We also get involved in legal advocacy, where again we have an arm of the organization that gets involved in policy decisions made with our legislators. We also have an education arm where that's where I come in. I go out, I do media hits, and we have a homeschool program that's free. We have a podcast, the National Police Association podcast. And again, so we do a lot and we do it all with donor funds. So go to nationalpolice.org, hit that donate button.
Betsy, what years were you active in law enforcement?
So I became a police officer in December of 1980 and I retired in May of 2009.
What was it like to be a female cop back then in the 80s?
I'll have people say, because I hate DEI stuff. I detest it. And even though I am probably the most well-known female police trainer in this country, I've trained in 49 states and 5 different countries. And I've trained women police officers from about 60 different countries. When I was hired in 1980, when the testing took months, it took about 6 months to go through all the testing. I was a senior in college. They in the Chicago suburban area, they didn't want women cops. I had to be, and I'm small. I'm 5'5", and so I had to work out a lot. I did a lot of running. Our physical agility testing at that time involved things like the scaling the 8-foot wall and pushing a car and dragging a 250-pound body. And of course, this was in a city where you weren't even allowed to build a wall higher than 7 feet. But so it was interesting. I got to the police academy and there were 4 women who started on Monday. This was the Cook County Sheriff's Police Academy, is where suburban police officers went. By Friday, I was the only woman left. But it wasn't just the women they were harassing. It was women, blacks, Hispanics, and short guys. If you were under about 5'11", you would have gotten harassed in my academy. They didn't want short guys. And so that Friday, I was asked by the guy in charge of the academy, when he walked in and the only female left in the class, he says, "You shouldn't be sitting in the front row of my police academy. You ought to be on your knees giving me a blowjob." And again, this is January of 1981. It was pretty extraordinary. And back then, 1981, kept your mouth shut. You didn't fight back. You didn't argue back. You didn't file a lawsuit. All that. I actually, a few years later, when I was in narcotics, was dealing with this guy. His name was Don, and I was dealing with him, turning in some evidence. I was on a task force at that time, and we had become friendly. And I sat him down and said, "Why in the hell did you say that to me in the academy?" And he said, "Betsy, we were told, the whole staff was told, we're going to have this very diverse group." This is when standards in Illinois had just changed. And that we were supposed to harass anyone who was a minority or a female, and we were supposed to talk to you like bad guys on the streets would talk to you. And I was like, "Okay, that wasn't a great strategy." He said, "We figured that
Yeah.
out after your class." But anyway, I graduated the academy and went on to have a blast for 29 years.
When you got hired by the Naperville Police Department, how many cops were there?
So in 1980, I think the city was about 43,000 people. So we probably had about 50 cops. And I was not the first woman. Um, I was actually the fourth woman. There was a woman hired in the other women, three other women hired in the 70s. One got fired because she was single. She had a relationship with her married female training officer.
Oh my.
She got fired, and he's retired as a lieutenant.
Then what kind of firearms did you guys carry?
So we had a Smith& Wesson Model 59 millimeter, and you can't really tell, but I have the hands of a fourth grader. So for me to be able to qualify with that, it's a double, it's a huge firearm, double stack magazine. So to be able to qualify with that, even to be able to hold it, I had to rotate my hand so far around to access the trigger that my shots all went low and to the right. And so I had to qualify aiming high to the left. And I carried that damn thing for 10 years until they changed our general orders. And we were able to carry from a list of firearms. I was able to get a firearm. But many years later, about 20 years later, I was a writer for police1.com. So I did some research on the Smith & Wesson Model 59. This is after I had done just thousands of hours of remedial firearms training. And and I learned that Smith & Wesson developed that firearm for the Navy SEALs. And the Navy SEALs rejected it as too big and bulky for Navy SEALs to carry. And yet that's the firearm I end up carrying. And the reason we carried it is because my chief, God rest his soul, he got a great deal on, 100 of these handguns. And he wanted everybody to carry the same handgun because he wanted us to be able to exchange magazines in a firefight. And, I thought about that later as a trainer. And I thought, you know what? If you're out of magazines, which means you've, blown through, 3 or 4 of them. And I've got one magazine left. I'm probably going to use it myself, not give it to you. And,
Yeah.
so, but yeah, firearms were a real difficulty, back then in the 80s for small people.
So when you're 29 years in law enforcement in that police department, I did some research. You worked in a lot of different units. Can you kind of go into that?
Yeah, I started out in patrol, and very quickly on, I got hit by a car when I was still in field training. And so I had to have a bunch of different knee surgeries. And so when I was on light duty, they would put me with detectives. And so then when I came back to full duty, I ended up going into investigations. I looked like I was about 12 years old. I literally went to a burglary report. right after I got done with field training and got my knee squared away. And the lady called the police department back and demanded a real police officer because I looked so young and my shirt was hanging off of me because again, back then they didn't have women's
Yeah.
uniforms. So everything's hanging off of me. She's like, send me a real cop, not this police explorer. But anyway, so I went undercover. I was undercover for 4 years. And again, in the Chicago area, there weren't many women. The DEA in the whole Chicago area had one woman, and she really didn't work undercover. So I got lent out like a piece of equipment. I literally worked in 3 different states. I worked a lot in the city of Chicago, even though I was a suburban cop. And it was a phenomenal, phenomenal experience. I went back, I became a field training officer. I worked in detectives. And then when I got promoted to sergeant, I went back to patrol and I ran canine and I ran animal control. I got more death threats in animal control than any assignment I've ever had. And I worked child sex crimes, all kinds of stuff. I took over crime prevention. It got suggested to me that I put in for the crime prevention sergeant's job, and I was like, I I don't want to be the one you come to sign out the McGruff suit. I at that time, I didn't have kids. I didn't have I didn't want to do that stuff. And but it's not Betsy's police department on the patch here. And so I kind of got voluntold to put in for crime prevention. That was an amazing 7 years running the crime prevention unit. It was a large detective unit in the detective division, and I had civilians, and it was great. It was very healing, I think, to go somewhere where people wanted to see you coming. So that was a lot of fun. In the meantime, I took the lieutenant's test. I finally came up on the list, and I turned it down. And all of a sudden, I was back in patrol, and they said it was a total coincidence. And I finished out my last about 6 years as a patrol sergeant, having the time of my life.
In the 70s and 80s, drugs started making its way into suburban communities. Smaller police departments like yours start figuring out we're going to buy drugs, we're going to do buy and bust operations. So it was kind of in its infancy stage back then for smaller police departments. What was it like to be an undercover cop purchasing narcotics in those days?
So I was like the goodiest goody two shoes that you could find. I grew up in a farm in a Christian household. Mom's a teacher and all this stuff. So and when I became a cop, like marijuana and heroin, it was all the same to me. And I didn't, so they put me undercover with zero training. I never took a class in surveillance. I never took a class in how to be undercover, nothing. And so it was basically, here's a couple $100, kid, go into that bar and get some dope. And I'm like, so I would literally go into these crap bag bars and, you know, may I please buy some cocaine? Do you have cannabis that I could purchase? People are throwing dope at me. It was amazing. I literally bought coke from a guy I had arrested for DUI a few months earlier. We hadn't even gotten to court yet. And because I was a female, it was insane. But I didn't really know because I didn't have a woman to talk to about this stuff. Every single person that you buy dope from wants to have sex with you. They don't want your money. They want to have sex. And so I had to come up with all these schemes to get out of that. And so I was literally learning on the job. So it was extraordinary. And I remember about not even 2 years into being undercover, I'm in some northern suburb in Chicago, and I'm holding onto a bag. I'm waiting for a guy uh, to bring me a couple kilos of cocaine. Now, in Illinois in the 80s, couple kilos, this is a lot of dope. And I got $500,000 cash in a bag. And sitting next to me, I'm a nervous wreck. And it was and I'm just sitting there thinking, wow, this is all I've ever wanted to do for a living. Here I'm doing it. And I can't believe, because back then we all thought we were Miami Vice and all that. But it was a pretty extraordinary uh, time, and I think we were just so young and stupid that we were never afraid because we were too dumb to be afraid, I think.
Was that your largest buy?
Yeah, oh yeah. Yeah. We were I was regularly buying, back then you're buying an 8 ball, you're buying a quarter key, stuff like that. And back then marijuana was illegal. We were buying a lot of marijuana. I mean, trunkfuls of marijuana. And we were buying some heroin, Thai stick was kind of big in Illinois, you know. LSD was making a
Oh, yeah, I
making a
remember,
little
yeah.
comeback. We were buying it in sheets, and I learned the metric system really well. Thanks, thanks, thanks
That's
to
true.
cocaine.
Did you ever have any dangerous situations as an undercover?
We were, so I was. They put two task forces together, and so it was me and another guy from this task force. We're playing a couple. That was one of the things that we learned is you could go anywhere in a surveillance as a male-female couple. You could get so close to who you were surveilling. So it was a black guy from Chicago and me in this task force because they put us together as a couple. And so we're buying cocaine, tons of cocaine from this woman who worked for the state of Illinois. She worked for our Secretary of State. That's who gives you your driver's licenses. And she was very high up at that time in the state of Illinois. And so we're buying coke from her and her adult son. So we're going to do the kind of our little rule was you did 3 deals and then on the third one you'd swoop in and arrest everybody and all that. And we were going to be able to seize multiple cars in their condo and all that stuff. It was a very, the IRS involved, feds are involved. It's a very tight case. So they sat us down the day before we were supposed to do this final deal. And they said, we think this whole thing is compromised and we want to nut it because we had fake driver's licenses issued by the state of Illinois. And somebody had talked and they felt that she knew we were cops and that they were going to kill us, And so he and I talked and we weren't like great friends or anything, but we worked well together. And we talked and he's like, do you want to do it? I'm like, yeah, I think we should do it. We'd really put and again, I think this is dumb now that I'm going to risk my life for few kilos of coke, And so we said we're going to do it. So we go up to this condo. We've got, we weren't wired. We had, I think we had panic button pagers. This is the day of pagers, kids.
Yeah.
You don't know what that is. Google it, right? There's no internet, no. And again, we weren't at all wired and I don't even think we had guns. I think maybe my partner had a gun, but they wouldn't let me carry a gun because of the way I'd dress. So anyway, we're walking up and I'm thinking as I'm walking up that I hope my parents know enough to bury me in my uniform, even though I'm undercover, because I was sure we was positive we were going to die. And so I walked in, and so I'm thinking about that. I'm thinking about my parents. I'm so sad because my parents are going to have to bury me. My mom had cancer and blah, blah. So we walk in and they immediately grab my partner, throw him against the wall, and they're like stripping his clothes off. Because they're thinking we're wired. And so the older female, is looking at me. She's like, come here, because they're going to strip me down too. And I'm like, oh, here we go. And so I start to cry, and I look at her and I start crying, and she goes, what is wrong with you? And I'm pointing to my partner and she drags me into her kitchen. And I'm like, just when we were walking up here, this son of a bitch told me he's cheating on me. I can't believe he's cheating on me. Now, again, I'm like 23 years old. I'm sobbing. And she's like, that bastard, men are bastards. And so I sit down, I tell her this whole bullshit story. And she's like, oh, honey, and I'm like, I have nowhere to live. And he's going to kick me out and move this new girl in. He doesn't want this white girl and all this stuff. And she goes, oh, honey, here's what we're going to do. She goes, I'm going to, she goes, you got the money? I'm like, yeah. She goes, I'm going to give you the coke. You're going to go out the back door and you're going to do business. And you'll have enough money to get away from him. That son of a bitch. I'm like, thank you. I'm hugging her and everything. And I'm like, here we go. And then I hit the panic button. Boom. they hit the door.
Door comes off the hinges.
But it was like, and man, I would see her later in court, and I thought, man, if she could kill me, she would. But she went to prison. So, but I was sure we were dead.
Speaking about narcotics and stuff, and because this is going to lead up to something else. In law enforcement, we take for granted the things we see and the people we brush up against. So last week, I was a guest on your podcast, and we start chit-chatting after the episode, and I'm like, well, she worked in suburban Illinois, just outside of Chicago, and I had done an episode on my podcast about serial killer Bruce Lindhall, who killed, I think he's responsible for, at least that they know of, 12 murders. His life was cut short when he was killing women, and then he decides he's going to bring a guy home. And can you take it from there?
Can take it from there. Okay, so this is around, I think it's April of 1981. And I have been with my field training officer a week or two. And, we're working in the evening. And so we get sent to a call and I honestly don't remember what the original call was, but it was, dead body call. And we go to this condominium in a really nice area. And we go in and secure the scene, and there's two dead bodies. It's two dead men, and they're all like weirdly tangled up. One is on top of the other. And it was, and so I think this is my first dead body that I've ever seen. Certainly my first homicide. We only had 2 or 3 homicides a year. So we go in there, and of course I'm, this wide-eyed rookie. And there, the thing that I remember, I wasn't like scandalized by the dead bodies, but the smell, that coppery, bloody smell, because there was so much blood. I mean, just extraordinary amounts of blood with these tangled up bodies, and that coppery smell of blood was so extraordinary. So again, this is suburban Chicago, 1981. We don't have a crime scene unit. We have I think we had 2 detectives, and we were, the way that things worked in our town at that time, we worked under something called the generalist system, because most small police departments don't have detectives, or they have very limited detective stuff. So you had your own fingerprint kit, you had your own Polaroid camera, and then if the special guys were going to come out, they had 35 millimeter cameras, but we didn't have we had to call the county sheriff's department or the state police for a crime if we needed some real crime scene stuff. And stuff back then, this is pre-DNA, pre-luminol, all of that. And so we secure this condo, and all the other old cops, including my field training officer, have got to go out and do things. They're going to go and canvass the neighborhood, and they're going to wait. They've secured the scene. They're waiting for the coroner, all these things. So you stay here with the bodies, kids. And kid. And I'm sitting by, no cell phones back then, guys. And so I'm sitting there like feet from these 2 dead bodies and blood and all this stuff. And so we had the telephone that belongs to that condo, and they said, answer the telephone. If somebody calls, it'll probably be us. And I was like, okay. So I'm sitting there for probably 20 minutes, and the phone rings, and I pick it up, and it's one of the old guys, one of the old cops, and they're going, it's Bruce. It's because apparently we had identified it by that. This is Bruce. I'm going to haunt you. It was such typical childish cop BS. Well, let's screw with the girl cop. And I was like, psh. And then I sat there. I'll never forget this. I took out that giant, Smith & Wesson Model 59, and I held it in my lap, the entire rest of the time I was there. Because again, we didn't know that this was a murder accidental death at the time. We thought there's some stabber running around, and they're trying to, it scared the crap out of me. And so that was my first case and first homicide that I went to, and then when the coroner came and they, untangled the bodies, eventually got him in, and I remember the next day they told us at roll call that it was he had stabbed himself in the femoral artery. And then we didn't hear anything about it for a while, and then more things came out, more things continued to come out until just a couple of years ago, I believe.
Yeah, there's still things coming out where we're because they're starting to realize that besides Donner's Grove and Naperville, and he kind of started going out further and further to get victims. How long did you get stuck with sitting with the DOAs? Couple hours?
Oh, yeah. It seemed
Sucks, doesn't it?
forever, and,
I've been there.
it was just it was, I literally sat there, like, examining my own life choices. I was like, "Do I really wanna do this for a living?" Is this what it's gonna be? And, because again, I became a cop because I'm watching Dragnet and Adam 12 and all that stuff. And I'm like, here I am sitting next to these 2 bloody dead bodies. But it was fascinating to watch. I got to see what a coroner does. You learn that in the police academy, but, and watch the detectives and listen to them. And it was quite an experience. And we had Naperville for the 29 years I was there. We ended up, uh, we had one, in fact, the friend of mine, one of our detective sergeants went back into some of these cold cases from the 70s and learned so much more about what had happened back then. That, because we've had some kind of infamous cases.
Another notorious character you had the displeasure of meeting and kind of working with was Drew Peterson. And for those of you who don't know, Drew Peterson was the Bolingbrook cop who killed his third wife, and then his fourth wife vanishes, and he's doing interviews and carrying on. What was your first impression of him when you
So when I was undercover, so Bolingbrook, Illinois is on the south border of Naperville, Illinois. And so these are 2 cities. Naperville was very, kind of wealthy and all that. Bolingbrook was very, at that time, blue collar. And Naperville was in 2 different counties. There was DuPage County and Will County, and we shared that Will County border with Bolingbrook. So the first task force I was on was a county sheriff's department's task force in DuPage. So we, of course, dope dealers don't pay attention to
right?
jurisdictions.
Yeah.
So we end up doing some work in Will County and in Bolingbrook, and so we end up meeting with the kind of our counterparts in Bolingbrook and Will County, and one of them is this guy Drew Peterson, and he's a very stereotypical slick. He's kind of cop, except he's undercover. And so my first impression of him was just ugh, he just was icky. And he was a real sexist SOB. He would never address me. He would talk to my partner. He would say, my partner would be sitting like right here. And he'd say, tell her to do this, tell her to do that, tell her to do that. And my partner immediately got a real dislike for this guy. So we're in some meeting where we're going to go into some bars and stuff. And he says to my partner, we need to put her in a wet t-shirt contest and take her down to such and such a bar and show off her tits and let her buy some Coke in there. And my partner just, and he was certainly no innocent, but he's like, hold on. And he's like, come on. And we went to our boss, and my partner said, we are not working with this son of a bitch ever again. And so later on, just within days, not anything to do with me, but he got kicked out of that unit. And we never really did find out the reason why, but he immediately called my boss in my county unit saying, hey, are you guys hiring this and that? That's not how it worked at all. But he was one of those guys who, being that undercover cop, was like his whole identity. And that was kind of it. I didn't hear from him again until, so this is in the 80s. around 1993, um, my husband at the time left the Chicago Police Department, became a Bolingbrook police officer. And he comes home one day, and that's a tough transition to go from the city, to a
Yeah,
suburb.
yeah.
And so he came home one day and he goes, "Oh yeah, I have a new field training officer who's treating me decently. And he seems like a really good guy. His name's Drew Peterson." So we end up, typical cops, you socialize on your days off. And so I was pregnant. Drew Peterson's wife was pregnant. And so we ended up socializing, and she was very nice.
Which wife? Because he was married 4 times.
This was the one that he allegedly killed in the shower. I think
Oh,
this
no, he
is
was
his.
convicted of that, Kathleen Savio?
Yeah, yeah, Kathleen. Yeah, so this is his third wife. Third. She owned a business. She was a business owner in town and stuff. So, and again, she later left him because he, allegedly cheated on her. And so then, they started, uh, uh, I got divorced. I had a baby. She had a baby. Then I got divorced again, kind of lost track of him until our police department got involved in, because this, it was a big regional thing, this missing persons case involving somebody named Stacy Peterson, who was from Naperville. And she had run away, so she had some contacts with us. We also had a dive team. They were looking for her body in various bodies of water around the region. And she was the fourth wife of this guy who keeps popping up on the fringes of my life, Drew Peterson. And again, a good friend of mine from the Naperville Police Department, right when all this was starting to really come to light, ended up becoming the chief of Bolingbrook PD and getting this entire mess thrown into his lap. National television and all of that. And it was just an extraordinary time. And so my husband, my current husband, and my husband at that time was working for an organization called the Law Enforcement Television Network. So they were based out of Dallas, Texas, and he was LETN at that time, was a CNN affiliate back when CNN did real news. And so he is providing he had done a lot of commentary for the O.J. Simpson case and this and that. So he was doing commentary for this case as well. So it was quite a web.
Well, all right, so I started researching Drew Peterson because after we talked, I was like, "Oh, I gotta look into this." So his third wife, the one that you knew that was pregnant at the same time you were
Uh-huh.
pregnant, Kathleen Savio, she divorces Drew Peterson in October of 2003. She's later found dead in her bathtub a couple of months later on March 1st, 2004. Now, her death was initially ruled an accidental drowning by the coroner. When that story broke, what was your reaction to that? You just, I mean, did you say,
Well, I felt sad. I knew her, and but again, I had quite moved on from all of that. But it was, you know, I'll never forget that because at first we were all like, "Oh my God, a cop's wife is dead. How sad."
yeah.
That's how law enforcement is. It's like, are we gonna? And I was on the honor guard. Are we gonna send members of the honor guard to this funeral and all that kind of stuff? Well, of course, then you start hearing things about Drew Peterson and that he was I think it was a sergeant then, and that I heard rumors that he had come and kind of taken control of the scene and things like that. And I didn't know if any of this is true. And so at first I just, I felt sad. And then, you fast forward to the whole Stacy thing, and people started kind of putting things together.
You know what should have raised a lot of eyebrows from what I'm reading on Wikipedia? His second wife, who thank God got out unscathed like the first wife, was a woman by the name of Vicky Connolly. Allegedly, she said that during the divorce, he had told her, "I know how to kill you and make it look like an accident." If that is true, that should have raised a ton of flags. But what's crazier is at 49 years old, Peterson marries his fourth wife, a 19-year-old hotel receptionist, Stacey Ann Cowles. on October 2003. The same month he divorced his third wife, Kathleen. It's like he's trading cars. It's like the same month. And do you think now this girl was 19 years old when he married her? He's 49. You said she was a runaway at one
She had
time. Do you
run
think
away. She had a family in, she's from Naperville, and she was working as a hotel clerk down in Bolingbrook, and her family had kinda, pushed her aside, and supposedly they started dating when she was 17, which is, quite illegal, but he was a midnight sh I think he was a midnight shift patrol sergeant. And so, in patrol on midnights in a small town, if you're not arresting drunks, you're shaking doors, checking your businesses, things like that. But it was sad because she was a very pretty little girl and she was very vulnerable to a guy like him. She didn't have good family relationships, things like that. And from what everybody had told me, because I talked to other, police wives and other cops and stuff like that. And they were all like, she just seemed like the nicest girl, just a really, really sweet girl. And it was so sad that this predatory bastard, was able to manipulate her.
what's crazier is he marries her and then they move into a place in Bolingbrook, less than a mile from the home that he shared with Savio. It's like he was so confident in that area that he was going to get away. You would think like he would get out of town and maybe go 30 miles so people would forget about it. He was just like the ultimate narcissist.
He was extraordinarily arrogant. He was always arrogant. I mean, up until you can go back and watch videos of him in court and stuff like that. He was always angry, or I mean, always arrogant, always, overly confident, and he was very comfortable in Bolingbrook. And I will say that when, Chief Ray McGurry, who was a very upstanding guy and, from Naperville became the chief in Bolingbrook, I think that's when things really fell apart for Drew Peterson. Bolingbrook had kind of a reputation. They had this old mayor that was there forever, and that, he had some protections in certain parts of the city. And as Bolingbrook grew, he kind of lost a lot of his juice, if you will. And but he married Stacy, moved her into that neighborhood, and he had custody of his kids with Kathleen. So she's raising these two kids, and I think they had two more. And
Or
and it
yeah,
was
in total.
yeah, it was, you know, I mean, and again, you go back and you think about those kids, it's just so awful for those kids.
So I retired from the NYPD in July of 2007. This story breaks in October, and I got a lot of time on my hands. I'm watching the news. I'm trying to figure out what I'm going to do with the next. So now, like, I'm glued, like everyone else, to this. And cops, I mean, when something happens to the wife, the cops are always going to look at the husband or ex-husband or ex-boyfriend or boyfriend as a suspect. And most of these people will either cooperate with the investigation or clam up and get a lawyer. What struck me about Drew Peterson is he's doing interview after interview on his lawn. He's never met a camera he doesn't like. And I'm just watching this and I'm going, he did it. I says, this is a different kind of cat. Like, I don't think he was really cooperating 100% with the cops. Like, he was like tongue in cheek with them and, canceling interviews. He loved the press. Now,
Yeah.
Stacey Ann Peterson's body's never been found. You have a theory of what might have happened to her.
So Drew was a diver. He was a certified diver, and the theory that was going around, certainly our police department, really around the whole region, because again, Naperville's dive team, we have an outstanding dive team, and our dive team was very involved in going out to these huge bodies of water like the Cal-Sag Canal, because the working theory is that he had taken ballast, your diving weights, stuffed her body. Remember, Stacy was a tiny girl, tiny skinny girl, stuffed her in a blue barrel, the infamous blue barrel. Everybody talked about that. Sealed it up, threw her somewhere, probably the Cal-Sag Canal, where they have found semi-tracked fully loaded semi-tractor trailers in the Calcite Canal. It's a huge, deep canal that flows ultimately into Lake Michigan. And I, they looked for that and looked for that. The dive team, they had all kinds of different equipment and I don't think they're ever going to unfortunately find her body, but they did get her declared dead.
He was convicted of his third wife, Kathleen Savio, after they did
Uh-huh.
another autopsy. And he gets convicted and he's sent away. And you would think that's the end of Drew Peterson. But in February of 2015, Peterson is charged with attempting to put a hit out on James Glasgow, the Chicago area lead prosecutor in his murder trial. They charge him with that, and he gets another 40 years. You talk about a guy who's got to get the last word in.
Absolutely. This is, like you said, Drew Peterson never met a camera that he didn't like. He will take any kind of attention. And I think that's why, because, he was just sitting in prison. So Glasgow is the Will County, we call him state's attorneys, the prosecutor, the elected prosecutor. And so he wants to hire somebody to kill him. I mean, you just have to laugh. But he went about it so badly. And he got caught and then he got prosecuted. But again, that whole time that he was on, getting attention for the murder for hire, again, he is mugging for the camera and doing media interviews and all that. And back, during that time, this is when it was all still satellite trucks. We weren't doing Zoom and things like that. I'll never forget, because I ended up going by there before he was in prison. When they were investigating, when Stacy disappeared, all those satellite trucks on his street, and all that stuff. And then when he goes to prison, and of course we were all paying attention to it just because
Yes.
it was right next door. But I thought so many times about my initial interactions with him. I think he hated women, and I think about, thank God for my partner. Thank God I was never alone with that guy, because I think who knows what they may find out about him ultimately down the line.
Well, as bizarre as that is to that Drew Peterson story, Stacy Peterson's mother, Christy, was reported missing in 1998. She
Yeah.
vanished. Do you think he had anything to do with that?
Honestly, don't. They were an issue. They were a family who had issues. She was just a kid just trying to, again, she's 17 and working midnight shift at a no-tell motel. But it is just a very, it's a very bizarre thing.
So I have to ask, just before you retired, you were featured on a reality TV show. How did that come about?
Boy, that is a great story that we haven't talked about. So, my husband and I, Dave Smith, we got invited to go on a cruise. This is heading not where you think. So we're on a cruise ship, and it was a police training conference on a cruise ship, DT at sea, defensive tactics at sea. My husband is one of the primary trainers and a featured speaker, and I'm one of the other trainers. So every night you go to the same table. And so we're with the guy who ran the conference. His name's Roy Bedard. He's a famous police expert. And he's very good friends with Sheriff John Bennell, who is my dinner partner every night. I'm sitting next to John Bennell, and he's like, so we got to know each other. He was very kind to my son, who was on the cruise as well, right before going into the Navy. So John Bennell went back to Hollywood and talked to a guy named Adam Reed, who is a reality TV producer. And he's done a ton of really famous reality TV shows, Mormon Wives, all kinds of stuff. And says, you need to feature this woman cop, because she's traveling. At that time, I'm traveling all around the country, actually internationally, doing police training too. So I'm doing that. Plus I got a kid, stuff like that. And so this Hollywood guy, Adam Reed, calls me and says, you want to do this reality show? He got my friend Roy Bedard involved. And so I met with him, and I'm like, it's Naperville, Illinois. It's not going to be that interesting. We're not the women of Brevard County. And so I said, I'll do it, but it's gotta be, you need to make it an ensemble. If I'm just a patrol sergeant, I'm boring. I'm old. I'm at the end of my career. I was 49 years old. So we had to go through, nobody thinks about this stuff. We had to go to city council multiple times. We had to have attorneys involved. There were all these contracts and going back and forth. But they decided to do it, and they offered it to, we had about 20 women in the department, and about half of them agreed to be a part of it. And the other half said, no, I don't want to. And then every cop who was involved in it. And so it's called Female Forces. So you'll see us go on calls, and some cops' face will be blurred out because they wouldn't sign the waiver and this and that. This created quite a bit of a crap storm in my agency, as you can
Yeah,
imagine,
I would think.
because, in fact, we had a couple of women, one in particular, who had said, absolutely, I will not do this. I will never be involved in reality TV. And the minute it hit the airwaves, she ran around telling everybody, Betsy wouldn't let me be involved, and I wanted to be involved, and blah, 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 because we were getting a lot of attention. And it was ridiculous. Women are ridiculous. So anyway, it was a very successful show. It is on, actually, I'm trying to remember the network. It's on Biography Channel right now, but it was on, whoever owns the Biography Channel is who bought the show. It's on to this day. I still get nice emails and creepy emails almost every week about female porn. Like, we filmed that in 2008, guys. I have since had cancer. I have been bald. I don't look like that gal with the red hair that they call the princess anymore. But it was an interesting experience and a lot of fun. And I don't know how those guys on Cops did it, getting fun. We had, in fact, a lot of our crew were from the Cops crew. And I'm still in touch with a bunch of them to this day. It was great.
Betsy, you're still involved with law enforcement through your organization, so you kind of have your finger on the pulse of what's going on out there. How would you say policing's changed since you were hired back in the 80s?
Oh God, so much has changed. Cops go through these phases where we're hated and then we're loved, I mean, that from 9/11/01, and you can look at the Michael Brown shooting, you can all kinds of stuff. Uh, um, but I think what has changed so much is the fun we used to have. We got to be cops without, I only wore a body camera very, very briefly toward the end. I was a cop where we didn't even have dash cameras. So, we had a lot more freedom to say and do things. And so we got to have a lot more fun, I think. Now, everybody is looking to post something bad about a cop on social media, or get you indicted, and things like that. We had a lot more freedom. We had a lot more fun. Now, those cops out there, and I'm still traveling around training cops. We used to kind of worry about getting hurt. We didn't. That's not really what we worried about most. We worried about getting sued. Oh my goodness, am I going to get sued? Now they worry about getting indicted and going to prison. So I think it's a lot more difficult job now. And I'll say it again. I said in the beginning, I hate hiring for DEI, hate 30 by 30 initiative. We got to have 30% female cops by 2030. If you're going to be a cop, you better be qualified, male or female. I don't care about your sexuality. I don't care about your skin color, and I don't care about your sex. But I want whoever shows up when I call 911 as a senior citizen to be qualified in what they do. And I hope we're heading back in that direction.
So, Betsy, please tell us the name of your organization and where our listeners can find you for speaking engagements.
So go to nationalpolice.org, nationalpolice.org, and take a look at all the great things that we're doing. Hit that donate button if you can, because we absolutely need your donations. And you can contact me from the website, and you can also follow me on X at SGT Betsy Smith. I have a lot of opinions about almost everything. And follow me on X, and you can contact me there as well.
Betsy Brantner Smith, thank you so much for spending your time with us today.
Thanks for having me.
As always, I'd like to thank everyone else for tuning in, especially my listeners in Jersey City, Jersey, Alexandria, Virginia, Rochester, New York, and Wilmington, Illinois. If you work in law enforcement or had an interesting criminal background, please drop me a note on Twitter or Instagram at VicFerrari50. If you're watching on YouTube, please hit the like and subscribe button. If you enjoy the content, just check out my Amazon Author page. Type in my name, Vic, Ferrari like the car, where you can preview all my NYPD books for free. Thanks again, everyone, and I'll see you next week.